Mobile hunters, the king of comfort has arrived. Go to tetherednation.com and check out the new Lockdown saddle. Over the past 2 years, Tethered has tested and refined a new approach to their saddle lineup. The Lockdown saddle takes the best-in-class features from the Phantom, like the UtiliBridge, comfort channels, and included an expandable saddle body with their Lockdown link construction to take saddle hunting to the next level of comfort. As if this wasn't enough, they developed Lockdown haulers, which has a slightly rigid internal frame structure, so you can easily unzip, zip, and access haulers with one hand. And if you're a guy like me with no junk in your trunk and have issues with your saddle staying put while you're walking in to hunt, the Lockdown modular yoke solves this problem. Whether you're new to saddle hunting or an old tree climbing veteran, go to tetherednation.com for all your saddle hunting gear. All right, folks, welcome back to another episode of the Truth from the Stand Deer Hunting Podcast. I have on my good buddy, Mr. Erik Barber. What's going on, man? The crowd goes wild. What's happening, dude?
Good to see you, Clint. It's a great time here in Wisconsin. It was opening of gun season this weekend, and riding high on that.
Nice, man. That's awesome, dude. Yeah, I'm glad to have you on, dude. It's been a long time coming. Like, I looked back. I've wanted to have you on for years, and I think the first time we touched base was like 2018 or something like that. And for whatever reason, schedules got messed up and we ended up having to miss that recording session. And it's taken shamefully almost 5 years to come back around and get you on, man. But I'm stoked to have you on. A lot has changed for both of us between now and then, but I'm glad you could make some time to hop on. And you had a killer fall, man. We're gonna jump into that, but you got to be feeling pretty good.
It was one for the books. Seriously, I couldn't be more stoked with how the season went. Had an Iowa tag in my pocket, North Dakota tag in my pocket, still have that tag in my pocket, and then killed an awesome buck here in Wisconsin. So it was one for the books. I'm so filled up on this right now. It's perfect.
Nice. So we're recording this the week of Thanksgiving, just for the folks that are listening. You all ready for the holidays? Do you guys do like a bird? Do you guys do ham? What do you guys do in Wisconsin?
Yeah, we're turkey folks.
Okay.
Do a big turkey. Whether it's so last year we hosted for the first time. We bought a house a year ago, so we had that, of course, host. This year we're going to my in-laws and a huge turkey, all the fixings, things. So it'll be good.
Nice. That's awesome. What's your favorite part of the meal, man? What's your go-to? Are you like a turkey guy? Are you a mashed potato guy? Are you a pumpkin pie guy? What's your jam?
So generally speaking, turkey for sure. More of a dark meat guy.
Okay.
Going to the in-laws, my mother-in-law makes the best cheesy potatoes they have.
Oh.
So that is a very close second. It's 1B to turkey being 1A.
Right. Okay. I should have guessed something with cheese being from Wisconsin. You got to go cheese. Right. That's
sure
awesome.
Thoughts, Right.
Exactly, man. I think mine is, I think my favorite part of it is the wet stuffing. That's my jam. I love some turkey, I love some mashed potatoes, but the wet stuffing, because I only get that once a year.
Yep.
You get some turkey other times or some mashed potatoes other times, but that wet stuffing and pumpkin roll is my jam. I will eat that until I go into a coma.
Yeah, man. Pumpkin bars. We do pumpkin bars.
Ooh.
Very similar. Real heavy cream cheese frosting on top.
More cheese. I love it.
Yeah. I'm getting in a food coma just talking.
I know. That's awesome, man. So you guys, you hosted last year. You said you bought a house a year ago. So you've had a lot of big anniversaries that have popped up, and the one thing I want to talk about, because how I kind of met you, I guess, is early on was I kind of I knew a couple of the guys from THP just because I had them on the show and stuff like that, and I kind of knew of you through them essentially.
Yep.
And I knew that you had worked with Midwest Whitetail, and you had interned there, and I think Aaron and Zach were there, I think, at the same time whenever you were interning there.
Yep.
And then of course they broke off and did all the awesome stuff that they've been doing. And I kind of I saw you, I forget where exactly I saw you, but I was that guy's kind of interesting. I was I should have him on the show, And I don't know what it was, but I was like, it seems like a good dude. I was like, I should have him on. Knows his stuff. You kill turkeys. I can't kill turkeys. So I was like, so he's a better hunter than I am. I was like, so there's that. So there's that. But you recently, I saw a post that you made that I thought was really cool that, it was your 10-year anniversary of kind of taking the leap of faith of jumping both feet into the hunting space, right?
Yep.
From the time that you left home essentially, right, to become an intern and then kind of, go on to do what you do now, which is, you work for Vortex. So talk to me a little bit about like that leap into the hunting space. Like when you first took that internship, were you like, it's the hunting space or bust? Or were you kind of like, I'm going to check this out and see what happens? And like, I don't know if it'll work out or not. What was your kind of thoughts thinking back on it now as like an older person, right? Like what would you tell that young guy now?
It's so hilarious, man, because I remember distinctly, like it even actually predates the internship. I went to Carroll College, now Carroll University in southeast Wisconsin, near where I grew up. And when I started college, I was an exercise science major. I wanted to be a sports nutritionist or something like that, something in that field. And it was like literally 3 weeks of into college. I'm like, I cannot do this. Like all the science, all the stuff. I'm like, this is just not my jam. It's not going to work. And I remember distinctly sitting in my dorm room. It was like early October. Of course, I was all, into hunting, still back. But I knew I had an exam the following morning. Then I knew I was going to fail. Because I just didn't know the stuff. And I went on Deer Hunting's website. I was just looking at different editors of Deer Hunting. I would read their bio, and then I would backtrack to where they would say where they went to school, what they went to school for. And all these guys went to school for communication, journalism, business marketing, stuff like that. So literally that night, I'm like, I'm going to go in tomorrow. I'm going to fail that exam. I'm going to change my major afterwards to marketing communications. And I'm going to be an editor of a hunting magazine someday. And, I did that. I changed my major the next day. I got an 11% exam. It's with track. It was horrible. It was absolutely horrible. But anyways, I changed my major, and then fast forward 3 years. I would have been a junior at that point, so fast forward 2 years, 2.5 years. It was spring semester of my junior year. Saw a posting from Midwest Whitetail, and it was a Facebook post, and in there it said looking for interns, and then there was this line that stuck out, and it was on Bill's personal Facebook page. It said, this opportunity can literally change the direction of your life. And, I put together my stuff. I applied. I actually went on to, I watched the show of Oily. I looked up Aaron, Jared Mills, and Pat McSherry were the 3 full-time guys there at the time. And I messaged those guys. I friend requested them on Facebook. That's when Facebook was still big. Instagram was basically brand new. And messaged those guys, and Facebook actually charged me $5 to message them, which I thought was kind of sketchy. But
yeah, no doubt.
Messaged those guys, and went through the interview process, and it all worked out. And going into that internship, to answer your question, I was like, I'm going to give this everything I have, because I really don't know what I'm going to do. This is everything I'm passionate about. And if it's not this, I don't know what else it would be. And, it was one of those deals where I went there thinking that I was going to be somebody that helped out with the website, helped out with the writing articles for the website, managing the social media stuff, maybe getting a couple chances here and there to film. And 6 days into my internship, one of the guys who his primary responsibility was going to be to film, he backed out. And right away, when one guy down, and then I got an opportunity to go to be the guy that filmed in addition to those other things. And I'll never forget, we went out on Wikis. I was filming a segment for a season show with Berg, and he handed me a Sony EX1. He's like, figure it out. And put that thing on a tripod. And I literally did not know how to turn it on. I had no idea. I finally do get it on. It's like everything is white, like it's way overexposed. It just looks like hell. And he kind of helped me get my settings right and filmed that show. And we thought it was due like the following week. When we come back, and this is on a Friday evening, and we come back, and Warb looks at me. He's like, "Hey," he's like, "That's due Sunday morning or Sunday evening. We need to get it over to Cabela's because they need it was their whitetail watch series, and they needed to post it that Monday." And he's like, "I don't know how we're going to do this." He's like, "I'll just do your segment because you're not going to know how to do any of this." And I literally stayed out for 2 days straight and got that stupid show done. It was like a little 5 minute segment that today would take anyone, 30, 40 minutes to put together.
Right.
And after that, it was kind of like things clicked. And I'm like, if I continue to like learn about this stuff and put in, work, it will work out. Something, whether it's there, elsewhere, whatever. And taking it full circle, like it literally did change the direction of my life because I have no idea what I would be doing if it wouldn't have been for that opportunity.
Right. That's awesome, man. Like I love like the dealing with the have to, right? Like when you just got to figure something out, like that's usually when the magic happens. I know whenever I first went to intern at a recording studio, because the band and the music thing was like the first thing that I did like professionally. And I walked into my buddy's studio. Actually, I met him at a bar and we were just talking music. And I realized I had just moved from Philadelphia to Florida and he was from New Jersey originally. So we had like regionally, we were from like roughly the same area. We were into all the same music, and we were just kind of talking and, he was like, "Oh, you're in a band." And we were just kind of BSing. And I was like, "Yeah." It's like, I actually moved there to go to Full Sail, to like a recording arts school. And he's like, "Don't go there, man." He's like, "Plenty of people waste their money there." He's like, "Just come to my studio and intern." He's like, "Do you know how to use recording equipment?" And I was like, "Oh yeah, dude, I'm good. Been in studios a bunch." Like reality was I was in a studio one time in my life, you know what I mean? And that was it.
Yeah.
And I just basically showed up and just started faking it until I made it. Right. And then I eventually got a job there and, the band did stuff. We got signed, like, that was what I did for a long time. And it was funny because we looked back on it talking and after I had the job for a while and we became really, really close. And I was like, when did you realize that I was full of shit? He's like, "Oh, the first day." He's like, "I knew you did." He's like, "I knew you had no clue what you were doing." He was like, "But dude," he's like, "you figured it out and you would just figure out whatever it was I asked you to do." He's like, "And he's like, you had an ear for certain tones, for certain instruments." He's like, "That I couldn't find, that nobody else I worked with had, that you just were naturally understood what stuff was supposed to sound like." He's like, "So when you mic stuff up," he's like, "you didn't really know what you were doing." He's like, "But you knew it sounded good." He was like, and so he's like, "I just let you run." You know what I mean? So, but it was kind of funny because he's so like, anybody else, he's like, I would have canned him like in the first like 2 days. He's like, "But you had a good ear." He's like, "So I kept you around for a while."
That's so cool, man. Yep. Yeah. That's how it works out, fake it till you make it.
That's it, man. So what was, so in the past decade, right? So like just going from that to like now you're at Vortex, right? What have you learned in the past decade? Do you think that were kind of like, I guess, moments that maybe shaped you or things that you were like, that you look back on, you're like, wow, that was a really kind of a pivotal moment, or that was a really like big learning opportunity, aside from like Warb saying, "Hey, figure this thing out." Aside from that part, what are some of the, like the big things that you've learned like 10 years in the making?
Yeah. The biggest thing is the people, for sure. The people, no matter what you're doing. I mean, you could be in the trades, my dad's a carpenter, you could be a carpenter contractor. And, if you're surrounded by good people, the good things are going to happen. And what I mean by that is, I interned in 2013 and started full time in December of 2014. So I had a little bit of a time off there where I could actually go back and finish school before I started full time at Midwest Whitetail. And it would have been like the fall. It was November of 2015. I was kind of coming into my own a little bit. I was starting to understand a little bit more about editing. I was kind of developing my own style, when I was filming, editing, whatever. I was starting to, you get that little like bump early in your career where you get a little confident, and you're an idiot because, you know, and, and that was me. Like, that was 100% me.
Right.
And I remember questioning Ward, and Ward was he ran the show. You know, like
Yeah.
he was our, like if we didn't have titles at Midwest Whitetail, but if he did, his would have been like the office manager, you know, in
Mm-hmm.
addition to editing and filming and all the things, right? So we all kind of like answered to him, and then he was, you know, answering to Bill. And I was kind of like pushing him back on something. And, you know, we had a healthy debate, I'd call it, in the parking lot of Midwest Whitetail. And I was frustrated. And he at the end of it, he's like, you know, if I didn't care about you, I wouldn't be talking to you about this. I would let you do whatever you want.
Right.
You know, and that was like a light bulb moment that, I mean, he doesn't even actually know the story. He probably doesn't even like think about this, you know, but this is something that like when he said that, it was something that I just like, it clicked, and that has stayed true from Midwest Whitetail to, you know, now at Vortex. Like, if you're surrounded by good people that care, good things are going to happen. And that's probably been the biggest thing, whether it's looking for people to be on the team, looking for the people that you want to surround yourself with, or whatever. You know, if you're a team with a good people connection can out compete the most talented crew out there all day.
Yeah. Yeah, man. I mean, you see that, you know, when you look at team sports, right? It's rarely the most talented team. It's usually the team that is most connected to each other and willing to do anything for the guy next to them, right? Like, if you ever listen to anything from any of the SEALs, right? They'll always tell you,
Yep.
I'll take the guy who physically can't do X, Y, and Z, but that I can trust that when he says I'm going to do X, by God, he's going to try to do X. He may not be physically capable to do all of it, right? But I'll take that guy than the guy that I think might leave me high and dry, you know?
Absolutely.
And I forget, there was a quote that I saw from one of them. I forget what SEAL it was. It's like a well-known, it's like someone like a Jocko or something like that, but said something like, I will take 8 guys that are capable, you know, and willing, than 8 guys plus 2 more that are capable but not willing. Like, just don't even send me the other 2.
Mm-hmm.
You know, I'd rather go in unmanned or undermanned with more capable and willing people than going in with more people and have 2 guys that aren't all about it. You know,
Yep.
And he said, we'll outperform the team with 10 with 2 guys that aren't all about it. You know, so
that's spot on.
yeah. So, you know, so thinking about that, right? And I think what Warb said to you was true. It's like, it immediately made me think of, you know, conversations I've had, whether it was like with a coach or whatever, that, you know, usually the people who care most about you are usually the hardest on you. Right. Cause like they want to pull out like everything that you're capable of, you know what I mean? Whether you had a coach in high school, college, you know, or just a good like mentor or whatever, you know? And so all the time that you've spent in the space, you know, how have you seen the space evolve? Right. Cause you were really like at the infancy of like the digital kind of transformation of the space to a degree, right? Because prior to like Midwest Whitetail, that was really the kind of the first show that went on the digital platform, right? That was when you really started to see the industry of like real, like of TV start to go away and things move to a digital platform. And then of course, like the THP guys kind of took it and blew it out of the water. And then everyone and their mother has followed suit now, then after that, right? But you were kind of really at the precipice of that. Like, that's really kind of where all that started. Can you talk to me a little bit about how you've seen things evolve from your perspective?
Yeah, the biggest thing that I feel there is like the brands, the shows, whether it's you know, an influencer, or, you know, guys like THP that have like their own business, their own web show, or a brand like Vortex. It's the people that can connect to the other people that are watching, whatever that is. Whether it's, you know, at Vortex we have a product. THP, their product is a show that they put out. But if you can't connect to the end consumer, the person that's on the other side of it, you know, it's really an uphill battle. And man, like, that is one thing that I think has been so cool in watching like the hunting media and hunting industry kind of evolve. And you've seen a little bit more focus on the, like, connecting with that audience, that person who's, you know, listening to every podcast, or, you know, playing commenting on every video or using your stuff in the field, whatever it is. You know, it's that focus on the person there, and those are the brands or the entities that are doing really well. Whereas, like, you know, 10 years ago, 15 years ago, I mean, even when I first started watching hunting content, when I was like T&N Outdoors, you know, back when I was like 7, 8 years old, you know,
Right.
it was more just about like, look at me, watch me do this. This is really cool. And like, that's still part of it. And it's always going to be, right? Like, you
Right.
always got to have people excited and hyped up about stuff. But as it's kind of taken a little bit more of a shift towards that connection, I look at like the Heartland Bowhunter guys a lot. Like, those guys have done such a great job for so long, and they just kind of like they fly under the radar as being like some of the best, most talented dudes out there, especially at like telling the story that connects to people.
Yeah.
You know, like I'll watch a hunt with like Skylar, and he's got like his kid in the blind, and it's like, dude, that's awesome. Like, everyone can relate to that, and that is what makes me feel connected there. You know,
Right. I think dude. I love the way you kind of said it. How it's like it's really kind of figuring out a way to connect to the person on the other side, right? And what I think is really cool is that there's so many ways. I'm trying to figure out how to say this, that there's so many ways to be a publisher or an entity, if you will, right? There's so many platforms that you can utilize to tell a story, you know, to be a storyteller, that we now have variety, right? We've got different flavors, right? Where before you really got one flavor. And if that flavor wasn't yours, then you were just kind of SOL, right? So it didn't feel like hunting was maybe accessible for everybody. Like, if you go back in time, I'm a little bit older than you, so like, going back and watching some of the TV shows and stuff that I had when I was a kid, like, I rarely watched hunting shows because we didn't have cable like where I grew up. So it's like very rarely did I get to watch like a hunting show. But it was very, you know, it was very old school. Like you said, like, look at me, I'm sitting on like a field edge somewhere, and I killed this because I use these 3 products. It was very much like that, right? That's kind of how it was, right? And for some people, like, they dig that, and that's awesome. Like, and there's that flavor for them. But like you were saying, it's like you got the Heartland Bowhunter guys. And I remember when I first starting this podcast, they were probably one of the first ones that I really started watching. And it was because of their storytelling. Like, they were just so good at telling like a meaningful story. And then the story was more than just the hunt. And the cinematography was so amazing. And like the audio was amazing. It felt like you were watching like a premiere of a very small film each time you watched an episode, you know? And I loved it for that. And then like my other flavor is like, you know, I love whitetail adrenaline. Like, that's probably my favorite stuff to watch because the cinematography is crazy. It's fast paced. Those guys are savages. They're killing giants. They're doing it on the ground, you know? And then whenever the THP guys did their thing, like, you know, and I still follow those guys, but it's like great content, very relatable, you know, and very transparent, you know, and that was like a refreshing breath of fresh air as well, you know? And so I think, to me, like, that's what I like the most, is that, man, there's a piece for anybody who is interested in any type of hunting, that it's out there for you now. Right.
Yeah, absolutely. And that is what's awesome, is like, no matter what you're doing, no matter if you're, you know, what your hunting style is, bow hunter, gun hunter, whatever, you know, like, that is the one thing that has probably bothered me the most over the last like 10 years, is like, as you get more invested in anything, whether it's, you know, a sport, or in this case, like we're talking about the hunting industry, you get closer to it and you start to see these fractures, you know, and it's like, you start to see these divisions of like this versus that, or like this style versus that style. This guy shot a 3-year-old, and then like people are complaining about him shooting a 3-year-old or whatever, you know?
Right.
So that's been the thing that like, you know, kind of the sidetrack is like, you get close to it and you kind of get disappointed by that. But then, you know, to back up and wrap up on that point, is there are so many different things for so many different people. But at the end of the day, every single person is trying to do the same thing. They're trying to go out in the woods, they're trying to have fun, and they're trying to shoot a deer that they're happy with and proud. And like, those are so simple. And if folks can just kind of wrap onto that, respect the other guy for doing what he's doing, but do your thing. And if you do your thing for you, you're going to be happy about it. And the people that are truly happy for you are going to be happy for you. And the people that aren't going to care or might be a little pessimistic about it, you're never going to hear from them because no one's ever going to reach out and let you up on it.
Right.
Do your thing, hunt your own hunt. You'll be good.
Yeah. It's funny because my buddy Chad and I used to always joke about that, there might be 3 guys a couple years from now that remember what you killed 3 years ago or last year or whatever, and he and I talked about that because we went to Kansas together and he killed, like 172-inch deer the first year we were there. And we were just kind of joking about it because it actually wasn't even the biggest deer he's ever killed, but it was a giant public land, like shot at 5 yards on the ground, like incredible hunt. And we were just kind of joking because I was like, dude, you realize, I didn't say you realize because we both knew this. And I was like, nobody's going to remember that you killed that deer the way you killed it and how exciting it was, except for like me and like the guys you work with at Exodus, essentially, right? Like your best friends.
No doubt.
And that's it, And, I had good fortune of killing a really good deer this year. And I joked about this because someone sent me a message and was like, dude, I was my buddy Johnny Utah. I was visiting with him in Iowa on my way back home, and we were joking because someone said, and they said this in a very nice way. They were like, "Oh man, it's going to do wonders for your podcast." And I joked with John. I was like, it's funny that people think that. I was like, because the reality is like next week nobody's going to remember. You know what I mean? I was like, it's meaningful to me, and I'll remember it for the rest of my life, but nobody else is going to remember. I was like, so you need to keep that. People need to keep that in mind when they're hunting. That it's not that important to everybody else. So do what you want to do.
I had an Iowa tag this year, and I went down there every weekend since September 30th until I ended up killing on October 30th, except one weekend. I went down there and I was like going to do that until like I'd be down there still.
Right. Yeah.
And I told my wife, we don't have kids yet, and it's like that's kind of my thing right now. Is like I'm really embracing this like stage of life that we're at right now. I can kind of do these things and, leave on the weekend and do that. Like we were talking, this was like mid-October, and actually I stayed home that weekend. It was the one weekend that I stayed home and I had like 170-inch 10-pointer created by my camera in broad daylight, 8:30 in the morning. It was the tree that I would have been that morning. And we were talking about it, and she's like, "Why are you so stressed about this piece of paper that is in a Ziploc bag that says Iowa DNR?" And she's like, I replied, I'm like, "Well, it's a lot of pressure. Like, I want to shoot a big deer. I want to do all that." She's like, "Why is it a lot of pressure?" She's like, "Nobody cares. No one cares what you're going to shoot." She's like, "Why don't I do your thing?" She's like, "I'm going to be happy for you no matter what you do. Your dad's going to be happy for you no matter what you do. And your friends that you share this with, they're going to be stoked. So don't put your pressure on yourself. Go down there and enjoy it." And I'm just like, you know what? Yeah, you're right. Like I think about other people that I've seen, kill bucks, even like pretty close buddies. I'm like, yeah, that's sweet. But then like the next day happens and you're boom back down in the day to day, and you're not thinking about the buck that my buddy up the road shot.
Yeah, I mean, you're 100%.
It was so refreshing.
Yeah, 100%, man. I mean, it's funny you say that because, I think personally when we have those like seminal moments for ourselves, right? Whether, it's filling a tag in Iowa, which is like a big deal because like, look, you only get them once every 4 to 5 years, depending on what unit you're going to be in, right? So it's not something that happens every day. And so, you try to hold on to that feeling or that moment, right? I certainly did after the Kansas hunt, and it was weird because I had time off when I came home because that happened early in the hunt. So I had like another week off. And I just remember sitting there thinking, like trying to replay it in my mind because I didn't want to lose it. You know what I mean? And like, I'm not going to get the mount back for a year. And of course I have the pictures and stuff, but I'm like trying to like hold on to that memory, and I just kind of caught myself and I'm like, why are you trying to hold on to something that's already happened? It's like, does it make it any more or less meaningful? Like I don't know. It was really kind of, maybe it's because I'm getting old, man. I don't know. I'm getting older, but I was like, you need to try to figure out how to feel like that every day without that like stimuli, without killing a big deer being the reason. Right. Like, and so that was kind of like
it's funny how deer hunting teaches you different things at different times, right? If you're just open to it, it'll teach you a lot. Like it just, if you soak in the moments and then you realize, because it made me think about like, man, why don't I feel like this all the time? You know what I mean? Like what is wrong with me that like I can't find that level of joy unless I achieve this like goal, right? And so it's interesting. But you're right, man. It's like nobody cares. And now at this point, it's like I'm back at work, and it's like, and I barely care. You know what I mean?
Right. Yeah, it is one of those things where like, back to your point about like, why does it have to go perfect for me to get excited?
Mm-hmm.
I'm only going to kill your biggest deer so many times, like at some point you can't do it anymore,
Yeah.
And I think that's where some people get in trouble is, everyone has that buddy that they've seen go through this. Like I've gone through it to a degree, everyone I'm sure that is, really passionate about anything, whether it's hunting, whatever the things that they do, you probably get a little burned out on it.
Mm-hmm.
But if it's like, hey, you got to realize it's the process, not like that outcome of like shooting that biggest deer. And if you can start having fun and like, hanging your saddle setup and like tweaking things and like just little enjoyments out of like, oh, I'm going to try this new spot. Or like, now I can identify what that tree is. And I enjoy that I am able to do that. Like it's little wins like that. And if you can hang on to that, man, that's going to keep you way more refreshed than like, oh, I need another 150.
Right. That's just it, dude. And it's funny you say that because it made me think about what are the things this season, when I think back on the season, right? What are the things that stand out to me, right? And it's funny because it's actually things from prior seasons, because it took me a couple of years to like fill the 2 tags I filled this year were actually tags that I took 3 years to fill, because it was learning a new piece and hunting, and I wanted to do it a certain way and stuff like that. And so I don't actually think about the day that I hunted this year. I think more about the days where I figured something out the past 2 seasons to fill both the tags. Like those are the moments that I got stoked on. You know what I mean? Like that's actually the piece that I remember most vividly. It was the lessons learned along the way that kind of stuck with me.
Right.
Yeah.
But
man, so you had the Iowa tag. I want to get into this the October hunt. So it was October was Iowa, right? Is where you filled that tag?
Yeah. Yep.
Right. So give me a little I don't want like the zone or whatever, but just give me a taste of like habitat, surroundings, like what kind of situation were you in there?
Yeah. So I lived in Iowa from 2013 to 2017, and the areas that I lived in are really getting hit really hard. So I'm like, man, I'm going to try a little different area. And I have a really good buddy that I reached out to, and he does, real estate work. And I hit him up back when I was like around the time of like figuring out what zone I was going to apply for. And I'm like, hey man, like, I've been applying for this tag for 5 years. I'm actually like looking for a lease. If you can find something, let me know. I'm looking for something that I can control, just because it's a little bit, like this is a hard tag to draw.
Yeah.
And, he's like, yep, I'll tell me what you're looking for, blah, blah, blah. And a week goes by, he calls me back. He's like, hey man, he's like, I, have hit up a bunch of people, tapped my network. And he's like, I'm not finding anything that I think you would like be happy with, but we own a bunch of land. Like this is him talking. He's like, our family owns a bunch of land. And he's like, you would be more than welcome to hunt it. And they have a great farm. And I was like, never in a million years would I have expected that. And I'm, I even had to take some time to think, like, man, is this really what I want to do? Like, I don't want to feel like I'm anytime you do that, there's that little piece where you're like, am I putting anybody out? Like, if I don't want to be a bother or anything like that.
Right.
Like, you know what? Like, screw that. Like, again, back to that human element. Like, there's so much good in that. So I called him back and like, let's do it.
Nice.
So I went down there and scouted his stuff a little bit in the summer, did some trail camera stuff, some glassing and whatnot, and then came down in the last weekend in September. It was the weekend that I opened. It was like the 30th and then the 1st. I think it was like the 1st fell on a Sunday, and the 30th was the Saturday. His family was out of town that weekend, and I'm like, you know what? Like, I want to at least go down there and get some cameras out on some public stuff, because is, you know, I have 2 weeks off for this tag. I have from October 28th through November 12th. And like throughout that 2 week period, you know, he has brothers, he has family, and that like they also hunt. And I'm like, I don't want to ever feel like I'm, you know, I want to have backup options if I just want to change the scenery. You know, I know
Right.
I was more than welcome to hunt his stuff. But I'm like, you know what, I'm going to go down, throw some cameras out, and go from there. So I went to this brand new piece. It was a, you know, a bigger section, and put a bunch of cameras out. She drove down. I left my house at like 2 a.m. on the 30th. Got down there, and I'm like walking through, and a little side story. It's kind of funny. I get to my first camera, put this camera on, like looking for ribs and stuff, and find like a couple ribs and like this scrape. I'm like, man, this is money. Put this camera on over there, and I walk like maybe like 20 yards past the camera, and like my hip belt on my backpack, and like, man, it's like really like rubbing and like hurts a little bit. And like this backpack, it doesn't win. All I have is trail cameras in here. So I unclip the you know, waist belt, and I lift up my shirt a little bit just to like look at my waistline, expecting to see like rub marks from my hip belt. And dude, I have like thousands of seed ticks on me. Like you could not have fit another tick on like my like hips.
Man.
I like freaked out. It was so bad. Like when I read it, they like formed like this line, and they were still all over the place.
Oh,
I mean, I
man.
legitimately had thousands. And I was going to sleep in the back of my truck that night, and it's hot. It was like 90 some degrees. And I'm like, I just got to like power through this. I got to get as many cameras as I can get out today. And I'm going to get in my truck at like 7 p.m. at dark, and I'm just heading straight back home because I did not sleep in like covered in these ticks. So put a couple more cameras out. I think I got 3 cameras out total that day. And the second one that I put out, I was like really stoked about. Like it was this little like creek bottom, big couple ridges that dumped down, and it was like the only scrape that I found that was right there, and it was like hard. Put that camera over that scrape and go home. 2 a.m. waking up my wife, and she's like doing the tick check. She was absolutely thrilled. But anyways, you know, that next week it was crazy because all of a sudden you're always waiting for that first like good cold front, and right away we were like October 6th. And throughout that week I was getting all these different bucks on that camera. So I go down there to hunt on the 6th. Actually hunted my buddy's private piece with him, and he killed a giant that night. Absolute giant. He killed like 173-inch 8-pointer. Just a freak of
dude,
nature.
that is just ridiculous.
Huge deer. And we were stoked about that. That was going to be one of the highlights of the season for sure. Just being there when he killed that deer. And then the next day I hunted the public and kind of got my butt kicked. I still didn't have the access dialed. And, you know, that was that weekend. From then, I came back the following weekend. I actually took that next weekend off. And then from there, it was go down and hunt every weekend until I was going to kill this deer or kill a buck down there, or until like my, you know, vacation from the 28th through the 12th came in, because I was basically dedicating the whole season to Iowa. And went down there for my vacation on the 27th. And hunted his private piece once, hunted the public piece a couple times. I was like bouncing, you know, back and forth because I still wanted to keep pressure off, even though I had like that 2 weeks. You know, I had such a long time. I wanted to keep pressure off the private piece until it got like really good. So It was, you know, I think I had from the 28th, 29th, 30th, when I killed him on the 30th, I think I spent I had at least 2 or 3 sits on the public at that point. And I went in on the 30th, and it was beautiful weather that day, like high pressure, freezing cold. I mean, it was like in the mid 30s, and we had warm weather that week, you know, leading up. So it was a big temp change, big front, you know, it was a perfect day. So I went into this spot. It was one of the deeper sections on it, and I'm like, you know what, like this public piece is going to start getting hammered. So like, I'm going to go for a home run right here, like right out of the gates, because I had started to see signs of more competition from other hunters. You start seeing more trail cameras popping up. There was like a really slow buildup of pressure that you were noticing. You'd be walking out and all of a sudden you'd come across a camera that wasn't there the weekend before when I hunted. So I was aware of that. Like I drove past, one parking lot and there was a gentleman from West Virginia in there that I talked to him, and he was like, I'm down here, until I kill a deer. Until I fill my buck tag. So I'm like, I knew all this was going on. So on the 30th, I'm like, I'm just going to go for the hunt on this property, pack in, and just sit it all day. So I went in after hunting the private piece in the morning and got skunked,
Mm-hmm.
And at like 10 o'clock, I go in, pull everything out, drive over to the public piece. I'm walking in probably around like 11:30. Get set up at noon, and I was sending my dad like video updates. He was living vicariously through this tag, through me.
Right.
I just got done sending him a video update of kind of how everything came together. Put my phone in my pocket, and all of a sudden you hear that like classic, crunching the leaves behind me. And I turned around, and there was this real nice buck coming right off the way that I walked in. He was coming on my weak side, so I had to spin, and I didn't really have a whole lot of time to check what it was. When I saw him right away, I'm like, man, that's the buck. I had a bumped a real nice one in this creek bottom in early October, and I'm like, that was definitely that deer. And he looks very, very similar. He's probably just a year younger than that deer. It turned out to be him.
Mm-hmm.
But I get turned around, and he comes through at like 8 yards, and at that point I'm drawing back. And I shoot, absolutely smoked him. He went 50 yards and stopped and just tipped over right there. And it was one of those days too where like deer were just on their feet like crazy. It was guys always say like the light switch flipped, and that was like one of those days that like felt like that. Bucks were dogging does. It was just super cool, and it was one of those things where like to tag out on October 30th in Iowa is one of those things where you're like, man, like I just wish I could like breathe life back into this thing and chase him for another 2 weeks. Not because you're like, not because you're sad that like you're like the deer you shot or whatever, but because like you want to experience as much as you can when you're down there,
Yeah. I totally agree with you, man. Dude, that's awesome. Like I want to go back to one thing, but I want to say that like I totally agree with you on that because usually I'm like a fourth quarter guy, man. I usually, when I fill tags out of state, it's usually like the last day of the hunt. That's just like the way I roll for whatever reason, But this year it was on the second day, and I caught myself like I was happy that I filled my tag, but there was a part of me that was like, man, I wish I was out like glassing again or like watching bucks chasing, just like the experience, like you say, like I want to like soak it all in, man. Like you only get this time once every year, and you just want to drink it all in as much as possible. But what was, you said that, you were still trying to dial in the access for that piece. So what was the access that you ended up using? Like, did it change from like the first sits, until like the last one? And if so, like, how did that change?
It did a lot. It was, like I said, the only time I set foot on this piece really was September 30th when I went in there and scouted the first time. And, then a handful of hunts here and there, but never really going into the epicenter of it. And when I went in the first time, what I tried doing is staying like really high on these open ridge tops. I thought they were going to be really open ridge tops. Generally down there, when you look at like hardwood, primarily hardwood properties, and I still do think that this is true, but this piece was just really unique. Generally speaking, those open hardwood ridge tops are like white oak, almost looks like a park. You can just walk through it. And then there's a creek bottom that all these ridges are dumping down into. And I'm like, I'm going to stay out of that creek bottom because I knew it was thick and I knew that's where those bucks were bedding. It was actually kind of backwards of what I've noticed, here hunting Southwest Wisconsin where I live. Those bucks definitely like having a little bit more of an elevation advantage here at home. And we're right in the heart of the driftless area. Those bucks definitely prefer being on the upper third of those ridges, which kind of threw me off that they were hanging out real low in that creek bottom. So the first hunt that I actually went in on was the morning of October 7th, and I went in blind, just with my headlamp, thinking that I would just cruise those open ridge tops, and it ended up being about a 1.75 mile walk in, and it was just thicker than heck. Like there was some cedar thickets up in there, and long story short, I totally blew it out. Like I'm like walking through this spot, and as I'm walking there, like I'm going in at the crack of dawn. Like it was like legitimately, I think I left the truck at 4:30 a.m. and this is like October 7th, because I knew, I'm just like, if I can get there and I can get set up right, like I'm going to kill one this morning. As I'm walking to the tree, my cell cam is like just, sending me pictures of like all the big bucks that I'm like hunting at that camera, at that scrape. And I'm like, if I can just get there, it's going to be beautiful. But the access was so tough. Like that hardwood was not at all what I thought it was going to be. It was all these cedar thickets, multiflora rows, just nasty, thicker than snot. And I honestly, like hindsight now talking about this, I think that's part of the reason why those deer weren't bedding in that. I think it was so thick. I think it gave them such a, like it didn't give them anything really from a sight advantage by them bedding up on those cedar thickets, because you couldn't see anything. Mm-hmm. Yeah, they were definitely secure. Nothing was really going to come through that stuff. But when they would go down on that transition edge of that creek, I think they just had, and especially in mornings, where the thermals would still kind of be pulling up in that creek bottom. I think they really liked that area. And just a lot of things were working there. And I think that's why those bucks preferred that. So that was the biggest thing that changed, because then when I started hunting it a little bit smarter, and that was the first time that I went in that day that I killed, was on that, or to hunt that specific area. What I did that time is I accessed from a totally different end of the property. And I found a dry creek bed that I thought there was going to be water in. Iowa had they didn't have a whole lot of rain this year. So this creek that historically holds water was totally dry. And I was able to access through that creek. And I mean, you're literally walking past those deer, because kind of like what we were talking about, like they were definitely bedding down that stuff. And I actually have a video of, it was like early October, when I was walking out from morning hunt. This buck just stood up, and he was 50 yards away. He was super nice, probably mid 140s, 9-pointer. And I don't think anyone was really doing that at that stage of the season. As the season went on, I think people started to, hunting pressure ramped up. Generally, I feel like residents in Iowa definitely don't really get after it in early October. So it's kind of like a sweet spot for a guy like myself, to get down there and take a couple cracks, especially on the public, before it gets hit pretty hard. So that was the biggest thing that changed, was access went from what I thought was always going to be walking through open ridge tops to coming in through a creek bottom. And that definitely is what paid off.
Nice. Yeah, that dry creek bottom, dude, anytime I can find like a little stream, ditch, whatever, that I can use, those are always money, man. Like that's,
love it.
Yeah, it's that or water access. Those are like my two favorite, at least for me around here, different, of course, whenever I'm traveling different places, but those are kind of like my two jams if I can have them. So you shoot this deer. Like, now what are you thinking after you shoot him? Because you just filled your Iowa tag. Aside from like what we said before, where it's like, man, I almost wish like immediately like I had a little bit more time to drink this in, but you just filled an Iowa tag, dude. Like you got to be stoked.
Oh, I'm so pumped. It was like, and it was so cool too, because, anytime you can shoot one early in the day and you can like get them out before it's pitch black, like that's always fun. I shot him at 12:29 that day. So I called my buddy. He came in. He brought his pack. I met him back in my truck. I dumped everything out of my pack. We go in, we quartered him up, packed him out on our backs, and that's always just like from a nostalgia standpoint. Like I just love doing that. Like if I'm killing a deer and I'm packing him out that way, like it always just feels awesome,
Nice.
So that was really cool. But I was like, as excited as I was, like as stoked as I was, like, man, I know the hunting from like as soon as I go home across that border into Wisconsin, the hunting's going to just go, ooh, you know, kind of like nose down.
Right.
Like
right.
this was my year to experience like multiple, you know, good bucks in bow range and past deer and all that, which I definitely got all of that throughout all of October.
Right.
Some of the guys I work with, I was showing them pictures of like bucks that I was passing either on my buddy's property or the public, and they're like, what are you doing? Like, shoot those deer, you know?
Right.
And again, you're just trying to soak it in. But as soon as I killed that deer and it kind of like set in that Iowa was over, it's kind of like I was just like thinking to myself, it's not going to be better at home. And,
right.
and that does set up for Wisconsin, because what ended up happening here was probably one of the most incredible bow hunts I've ever here.
Nice. We're going to jump into that one next here, but I want to agree with you that, you know, two things that you said that I totally agree with. One is that morning hunt kill. Like that's like, I don't have it. Like I don't do it very often for whatever reason. Most of mine are like midday or like evening. But I love hunting mornings in October. It's actually probably one of my favorite times to hunt, especially like that kind of almost like October lull time frame for whatever reason. Middle of the week.
Yep.
Around the lull. Like that's my favorite time because usually it keeps a lot of people out of the woods. You get a little bit less pressure, you know, for the most part, especially if you got some places dialed in, it can be just dynamite. And that's where I killed in Pennsylvania this year, was like the 16th at 7:15 a.m., you know? And so my favorite part of it was what you were kind of saying was like, I had all day to just soak it in. Like there was no rush. Like I got to get him out, you know, it was going to get warm. Yes. I had to get him out, but like I had all day to do it. There was a kayak ride. It was just like a lot of fun just to kind of soak in the moment, you know? But for me, it was like the opposite. Cause like now I was getting ready to go to Kansas. So now like my sights were set on like, okay, now I'm getting to go to the Super Bowl, you know, type of thing. So it was the inverse, but you know, so you fill that tag on the 30th and now you're back in Wisconsin. So obviously the hunting's different there, right? But talk to me a little bit about like the difference between like the habitat you were hunting on that public in Iowa versus the habitat you are hunting now in Wisconsin.
Yeah. So the habitat in Iowa was definitely more gradual terrain. You know, I like bunny hills is the best way to put them. You know, they're changes of elevation maybe like 250 feet. Whereas back home here in the driftless area, some of these hills are, you know, I mean, there's stuff probably very familiar to what you're hunting out in the Northeast. You know, you get some real crazy changes in elevation. Some of the stuff, you know, is borderline like ridiculous steep, which is stuff that I'm definitely looking for when it comes to like trying to separate myself from hunter access. But the other thing when it comes to Wisconsin is I bounce around way more in Wisconsin than I do when I'm out of state. When I'm out of state, I've actually kind of taken a little bit of an aggressive approach to that. Like even last year, I was hunting in Illinois, and I had 9 days to hunt, and I'm like, I'm going to learn this. It was a small practice. I mean, when I say small, it was still 300 some odd acres, but it wasn't the 4,000 acre chunk everyone's kind of dreaming about. And I'm like, I'm going to learn this area great. And you know, kind of sidetrack it. That worked last year in Illinois. Probably 11 different stand locations that I hung my saddle in, but they were all probably within 100 yards of each other. It was just a game of fine tuning. Whereas when I'm back home, because this is kind of my turf, I spend a ton of time scouting. I feel like I can just bounce all over the place. So I have a couple pieces that are like really dialed in. I know where to go. If I get a big buck on camera, I know how to hunt him. I know where he's going to be. And then I have other pieces that are more of wild cards, where like I'll just take a swing and see what happens. So I was hunting a giant here at home, one that showed up right before I left for the week before I left. And I mean, to knock on wood, I think he actually might still be out there. But I mean, this year is legitimate. He'd be a buck of a lifetime for me for sure. Like he's a giant status. And I was getting out deer pretty frequently, and he's in a piece that I know super well. He's actually on the piece that I spend the most time in. And so I'm like, this is perfect. You know, as soon as I kill this buck in Iowa, I'm going to go hunt this thing now for almost 2 weeks straight because I still had all that time off work. And habitat-wise, that property is more rolling hills, white oaks, a lot of multiflora rose, thick bedding, that kind of stuff. What I didn't, speeding up, I come back home, take a crack at them on Halloween, no dice, see a bunch of young bucks, bunch of does, feeling really good. We actually had snow on the ground that day. It just felt really right. November 1st, I go in there, and by sunrise was 7:44. At 7:42, I was already out of the tree because there were so many squirrel hunters. I didn't know this, but that property had opened up for squirrel hunting on that day, on November 1st. And it was horrible. Like, it was absolutely the craziest hunting pressure I've ever seen.
I never knew squirrel hunting was that big out there, dude. That's crazy.
It is. It's definitely pocketed. You know, there's some pieces where it's bigger. There's other pieces where no one really messes with it, and this is one of the pieces that it has a pretty loyal group of folks that hunt it. And yeah, I mean, it was unbelievable. Legitimately comparable, if not even more pressure than opening day of gun deer season.
Wow.
Because there were more shots. They're covering more ground.
Right.
Opening day of gun deer season, people are generally going to a spot they're sitting, whereas these folks were kind of walking ridges and walking all over the place. There's squirrels all over, and there's a bunch of shooting. But I wasn't going to let that totally discourage me. I still hunted it, I think, 4 times between the 31st and the 4th. And never connected up with that thing. I did actually just get a photo of that deer the other day, so I know he's still out there.
Nice.
So at least he was right the day before the gun opened. Whether he's still there now, that's kind of roll the dice, flip the coin, you know?
Yeah.
But anyways, yeah, that was, from a habitat standpoint, that's kind of what I was dealing with here in Wisconsin. And then I was really frustrated because I just, the squirrel hunting thing totally wrecked my plans on targeting that deer. And I needed a total reset. I actually texted my buddies and hey, as much as I want to hunt this thing, I'm giving up. I'm waving the white flag. It's not going to be worth me wasting my time. Even though this deer is so big, it's not worth me wasting a whole season on something that probably isn't going to happen.
Right.
So I started bouncing around at that point.
Right. And so, yeah, and I mean, now you kind of know too, for that piece, it's like if that deer is still around, it's like you need to probably kill him early, if that's going to, if that's going to happen. And so, you're mentioning kind of that you're bouncing around, which is funny because I'm kind of the opposite. Like I bounce around a lot more when I travel, and I have very kind of dialed in spots, to try to get away from pressure. Like for me around here, that I know that I can kind of slip into, and I know times a year. Like I always say that I target dates more than I do deer. Like I just target really good dates that I know are good for spots. But I know I was reading your post about this, that you talked about observing a lot of country in this. And so which was interesting, because when I saw you killed this deer, I think I was just getting back from Kansas, or I just killed in Kansas. And so it was very top of mind, that observing thing, because that's something that I'm having more and more appreciation for, just as an East Coast guy that grew up in the timbers and stuff, where you can't see real far. A visual wasn't really all that important to me. It was more where's the hot sign at that they're leaving? That's more what I'm kind of going on. That's what I've always kind of used. But actually, in talking to Joe Rentmeester, another Wisconsin fella, he was one of the, I won't say first guys, but just the last session I did with him, I just kind of noticed, I said to him after we got off the call, I said, what's really odd is that, you're a Wisconsin guy, you're hunting timber. I was like, but you mentioned getting a visual on a deer that you killed. You mentioned it multiple times. I was like, and it actually sounds a lot like hunting the way the guys from Whitetail Adrenaline do, where it's all about the visual. If you don't have the visual, there is no hunt, I was like, but you're just doing it a little bit differently. And he was like, wow, he's like, I never thought of it that way. He's like, but you're right. He's like, I do rely on a visual almost more than anything else. And so it made me think of that when I read your post, because here's another Wisconsin dude that's doing a lot of observing, I'm learning more about it as I've been hunting, like, the plain states and stuff like that. And it's slowly sinking in. So talk to me a little bit about like the observing that you were doing and like how that kind of played into the overall hunt.
Yeah. So this piece is a total curveball from all the other stuff that I hunt here back home. It's a piece that doesn't have a whole lot for tree cover in it. It's a lot of row crop and a lot of CRP, and then several small little like transition ditches, waterway ditches in the low points between the ridgetop fields. Mm-hmm. So cover is typically low, and things kind of come together. And I've hunted this piece a couple times during the gun season here because it is such a weird spot that like people just don't think to hunt it. That's all actually been the only time that I've been in there hunting was during the gun season. And knock on wood, I've always been able to avoid hunting pressure there. And so that was kind of my thing, is like I needed a hard reset for myself, after hunting basically every day from like the 27th until when I ended up actually killing this deer on the 4th. I had hunted every single day, I got, home and I was still hunting back here in Wisconsin, and I'm like, I need a day to reset. So I didn't hunt in the morning, worked on some like house projects, got leaves kind of in order in the backyard and whatnot. And then that afternoon, I'm like, I'm going to go just observe this property, get in a spot where I can see a ton. And my goal was to understand what the crop status was. I knew it was corn. I wanted to see if it was still cut, if it was cover standing, and then I just wanted to see like where deer were. I was actually hoping that the corn was going to be still standing because I really like hunting on the backside of standing cornfields. I just feel like that is one of the biggest constants that I've seen in my time hunting is deer really like to transition on that backside of standing corn. I think they feel really secure with security cover there. Rarely do things come through standing corn. And I just, over the years, I can point back to a lot of times where I've seen mature bucks cruising the backside of standing corn, especially in the low areas where the corn is up top and then there's a low area in the bottom. I think it's just something where they know nothing's coming up top through that standing corn, and they just can dial in that bottom. They can see down in it, and then in the mornings they can bed down in that and still get thermals pulling down. Mm-hmm. And it's basically, hey, nothing's in here, and I've got it totally confirmed. So I was hoping that the corn was going to be still standing, and it was. So that was the biggest thing that I was kind of looking for. And then that sit was more of an observation sit. I was going to get in a spot where there were 2 trees that were big enough to hold, big enough to get in. And I went and I got set up in one of these trees, and I could just see a ton of country. And sitting there, just could warm that. It wasn't an ideal, didn't have that ideal, big buck feel. But at 4 o'clock, I looked up. I just happened to kind of look straight to my north, and I see this spot that as soon as I saw it, it was 350 yards away. I'm like, that is a student. I cannot believe I've seen this. So yeah, he was kind of coming off this ridge with very limited cover, and he was coming down into the bottom, and I just got excited right away. And he couldn't hear me from that distance, and this is, I thought I messed up here in this moment, and I grabbed that first, and I just started hitting them hard together, and I did it for maybe 5 seconds until it clicked in my head. I'm like, I should not be doing this right now. Mm-hmm. Because he still had an elevation advantage on me, and he had direct line of sight to where I was at, and even this pin on my phone says decoy, rut stand, need decoy, and I didn't have a decoy, like a dummy. So when I started doing that, I'm like, he's gonna see me, he's gonna pinpoint him, he's gonna know the game is up, and he's gonna just keep cruising. So I stopped rallying basically as soon as I started, and I lost him behind the one kind of cedar on that ridge, and there was just a little bit of scrub oaks and stuff. And I totally lost him. I lost him for like 25 minutes. And I'm like, man, he probably just boogered out of there. And, you know, he knew something wasn't right. And he just kind of jetted out. So I was like really kind of agitated at myself for making that decision. I'm like, that was a rookie move to do that in that situation. I knew it was wrong. And 25 minutes later, he pops out on this point. Now he's down in a bottom, and he's probably about like 500 yards away. And I have like all this canary grass. I have a fence line between me and him. And he's definitely not going to be able to see like the area that I'd be calling from, but he's so far away. I mean, he's legitimately 550, 600 yards roughly. I'm like, this is it. Like, I'm just going to kind of go for broke. So I just grabbed the antlers and I just started smashing them together. And I don't have a ton of experience rattling bucks in. When it has worked, it's always been rattling sequences that have been more intense than what you would think to do, and longer than what you would think to do. So I just grabbed those antlers and I was smashing as hard as I can, as loud as I can. I did it probably for like a minute. And, you know, I stopped and he's just kind of standing there still looking at me. And this whole time, I'm not even getting that excited because I'm just playing this in my head, thinking that he's going to flick his tail and just keep going.
Right.
So he stops and he's still standing there and I'm looking at him in the binoculars and, all of a sudden he flicks his tail and does an about face and starts facing me. And as soon as he did that about face, all of a sudden he starts trotting and he just starts running, coming right.
That's crazy.
From like 600 yards away through the wide open. And I grabbed my cell phone, to just like film a little clip of him kind of running through because I'm like, no way is anybody ever going to believe that this happened. We just got to get some like video evidence of like, I saw a big buck today. I still don't think I'm going to kill this thing.
Right.
I'm not even excited. I didn't have the bone. So I'm like just filming him kind of coming through. And, you know, there's so much real estate between me and him, but he just keeps coming. And he closed from 600 to about 100, probably in about like 3 minutes. You know, he would just fast trot and then he would stop, lick his nose, flick his tail. And you know, he couldn't get a visual to where that sound came from. And he had to keep kind of working to a point where he could. He gets to 100 yards and he's on the border of private and public. And he's standing on private at the barbed wire fence looking into public. And I'm just thinking to myself, I'm like, this is it, buddy. Like, you're either going to hop this fence or you're not. And if you hop the fence, like, you're pretty committed. And then at that point, I was going to get pretty excited. And he stood there for probably about a minute, and which was way longer than I wanted him to. I was hoping he was going to come to that fence and make a snap decision to come in. So as soon as he started kind of hanging up, I'm like, this is it. It's over. But all of a sudden, boom, he hops the fence and he just kind of starts working this little transition line of like the only pocket of cover in this ditch that I'm set up in. And at that time, spike buck, little 1.5-year-old buck pops out right in front of me at about 20 yards. And I'm like, this is absolutely perfect. Like, he's going to see this, you know, little buck and
now you got
just
your decoy.
Kind of come right in. Got my decoy, exactly. So he gets behind this pin oak, and I can't see him, but I can hear him kind of in there. What he was doing is he was going up. Picture a ridge that drops down, and then a fence line that goes north-south, and I'm on the bottom, you know, but that ridge is kind of going up above me. He was getting up on that ridge. What I'm assuming he was doing was trying to get sight into that where he had that noise pad. And he's looking down there, and he sees a spiker, and I can hear him grunting and just kind of coming closer. I can hear him working scrapes, and you know, but I can't see him at this point because this pin oak is between him and I. And
how close is he at this point?
He's probably about 70 yards.
Okay. And what's that spike buck doing? Does he know that he's like that he's been set up or like?
Oh yeah, he's definitely like that. Spiker's getting a little bit nervous. He's, you know, boxing his ears, and he's just looking at the bigger buck. But he's also very curious, and this is what ended up kind of almost ruining it for me. that little buck is getting curious, and he's walking away, and he's walking towards that buck, and that he finally gets to about 50 yards, and he stops and he's looking at that. Like, I still can't see the big one, but he's basically straight to my left. He's he is actually higher than me elevation wise, like he's above me, and he's looking at the bigger buck. And as soon as he got elevation advantage on that big buck came unglued. He hated it. He busted out of the cover and lowers his head to run that small buck off, and he did, and that small buck runs up out of it, up and over, into the next county. Like, just went tearing out of there. And I went from what I thought was going to be a great situation to a really, really bad. Like, he's going to follow that buck, or at least run that buck off, but he's standing there at 50 yards. He's working a scrape, and he's got his antlers up in the scrape, and I dial the 50, and I draw back. That spiker is still up at the top of the ridge, and he's pretty preoccupied on that small buck. And I shoot, and I just missed him just a touch low. I actually thought I smoked him at first because of the sound that the arrow made when it hit the just like muddy ground. It was just a hollow whack. Right. He kind of like mule kicked a little bit, and he ran down the ridge 10 yards closer yet, and he bristles back up. And he turns straight away and walks right back to that same scrape that he was in. So I give myself an extra 2 yards of elevation dialed into the sight, and I'm like, this is it. Like, it's got to happen now. I'm not going to, get a crack at this thing again. So I draw back, and I remember holding like really long and just really trying to burn that pin in him, and really just trying to focus on making a good shot, because I know that first shot just was, just rattling this ball, super excited.
Yeah.
Just punched the trigger. I just got pin on and sent the arrow. So for the second shot, I was really just kind of focusing on trying to keep my form, maintain like a real solid, steady bow arm, and just start pulling through the shot. Bow goes off, and I see the arrow just burying right where the pin is. It's maybe about 3 inches up from the bottom of the brisket. So lower, but not low to the point where I'm like worried about it.
Right.
Arrow buries to the fletchings. The buck drops down to the ground and kind of like snowplows for like 1 to 2 steps. And as soon as I saw him, he's done. And then he kind of regained his footing, trotted up to the top of the hill, stood there for like 2 seconds, and then I lost him. And I'm just, my wheels are turning. I'm trying to replay everything in my head. About 5 minutes goes by. I can hear him coughing up there. So I know I have like at least one lung,
Right.
But immediately that was the thing that had me concerned. As 5 minutes went by, and he was coughing. If I would have double lunged him, there's no way 5 minutes goes by and he's still coughing. So I immediately started thinking one lung hit. And I was just really paranoid. So I backed out. I called the tracker that night. I called all my buddies. I actually called Warb and told him about the hit. And he's like, I'll go in there. That deer's dead. And I kind of just trusted my gut and, wasn't going to go in that night. I was going to come back the next morning. It was going to be frosty, cold night. Come back the next morning with my wife, and we go right to where I shot that deer. He had ran to the west. So I hugged the east fence line. And as I'm coming to the tree, blow him out right there. And he goes stumbling across the private, and he's walking across a picked bean field, and he looks awful. I mean, he can barely walk. Like, he's tripping. His rear end is kind of like hunched, and, he's being very deliberate with his steps. And it took him, forever. It took him, I think, 7 minutes for him to cross this field.
Wow. And
I'm just wrecked at this point. One, because, the deer, you did that to that deer. As the hunter, that's not what you want.
Right.
Two, I'm obviously want to recover that deer, and now he's on private. I don't know how I'm going to get contact with this guy. And all I can do is watch him go off. So I handed this was actually ended up being kind of key. I handed my phone to my wife and had to just film everything on my phone just so I knew exactly where that deer did go back into the brush once he got on the other side. And I actually watched him bed down once he kind of crossed. But again, he's on private. I can't do anything. So fast forward a couple minutes, maybe about like a half hour, I hear a four-wheeler on the private. And I run down to the edge and I flag the guy down. He comes over, tell him about what happened. The guy was phenomenal. He gave us access to go and track the deer. He said he's right on the line. If you shoot him, he goes over the fence. Here's that guy's phone number, and here's the number of the guy that leases it. The guy just was phenomenal.
That's awesome.
Which that ended up being the biggest key in this whole story was the fact that he was so generous with all that information. Because fast forward, trying to get done with this deer. It's still early in the morning. It's still probably about 8 a.m. The sun is behind the hill. It's, all the thermals are pulling down this little creek that he had crossed, and they're going downstream. But then, and I can see him. He's probably about 40 yards away, but he's just bedding in some real stuff. And I sat on him for probably an hour and a half. I would draw back. I would snort these as long as I could, just try to get him to stand up. And he would not stand up. Mm-hmm. And so I'm just going to wait him out. As soon as that sun popped up over the ridge, the day winds picked up and blew my scent right out. He stood up and just went one through there, and he went maybe about 15 yards and bedded down again. But no, it's definitely on that next neighbor's property. So I call the neighbor. He gives me access. He puts me in touch with the guy that is leasing the property, and that's what I was kind of nervous about. This guy is paying top dollar for this lease. He's got the week off that week. This is prime time. I didn't have a good feeling about it. But the guy was he's like, wow. Hey, he's like, that deer is dead. He's like, we're going to go find him. You tell me when you want to go in there. So this is now 10 a.m. the next day after the hit. And I just explained to the guy, I'm like, well, you're doing me a solid. You tell me, we're going to blow this up for this deer. So are you going to hunt this afternoon? If so, we'll give this thing until the following morning, which would have been Monday. Mm-hmm. And he's like, yeah, I am planning on hunting. He's like, that works out good for me. Let's plan on meeting here at 6:30 Monday morning. So that would have given the deer a full extra, 18 hours to expire. And he goes in to hunt that afternoon, and I'm just replaying everything in my head. I'm looking at the video. I'm looking at all these pictures of blood, and it definitely, I definitely had bubbles in the blood, had lung blood, and I just couldn't figure out what was going on. I figured it was a single lung hit, but it also was low enough or in the area of the heart.
Of the heart. That's what I thought. Originally, whenever you said where you hit it, I was like, man, it sounds like it might have got heart.
And especially with how the deer reacted with. His body kind of dropped out. I've never hit a deer there.
Right.
So I'm replaying all this stuff. There's a ton of cows on this property. I texted the gentleman that leased the property at about 3:30 that evening. And I texted him and I sent him a pin to exactly where the deer was, and I sent him all the pictures of the blood just to really let him know that, hey, I'm not some guy that just muscle hit a deer, and that I wanted him to know that we were going to recover this deer. And I sent him a pin, and what I was hoping he was going to do is text me back and say, yeah, let's go. Because I just couldn't let myself wait another night,
Right.
And what he ended up doing, and this is incredible, he got down, he had the right wind to kind of still hunt through that area and get that pin, go right to that pin. So we had a south wind that day. He hugs the north line. Got down out of his tree, and he's walking right to that pin. He said he pulled up his phone to look to check, where he was on the map. Looks down, sees the pin, looks up, and that buck is laying there dead.
Jeez. Dude, that's awesome.
It was unreal. So he texted me right away, and he's like, "Hey, I got something that you might want," and he sends me a picture of the deer laying
That's
dead in his
awesome.
bed. So it was one of those things that, like, I was just so jacked. Like, that could have went so
Awesome
many
buck
different
too, man.
ways.
That was such a good buck too. Awesome deer.
Thanks,
Yeah.
man. I'm stoked. Like, he's a super super solid buck, and just for that guy to do me that solid, like, it could have gone a lot of different ways for a lot of different people. So I'm really fortunate, really thankful that it ended the way that it did, because, man,
Yeah.
that would have been a tough one to swallow. So anyways, like, fast forwarding here to the shot, because I think this is super interesting. Field dressed the deer, and what I ended up hitting was just one blade went through the bottom of it.
Mm.
Like, if you think about the heart kind of as like an upside down, like, pear, that little node in the bottom, that had just one cut through it. The deer ended up being a little bit more quartering towards me than I thought he was. In hindsight, I don't actually, if I would have known that he was quartering like that, I don't know if I would have taken that shot at 50 yards.
Mm-hmm.
Because it actually entered in front of the outside shoulder low and flipped the bottom of the heart, and then put a hole in the front bottom of the outside lung, and then broke the shoulder, the upper leg bone on the opposite side. So
Got it.
is what explains him kind of dropping down at the
Right.
hip, and what explains the arrow not blowing all the way through. Because if I would have just hit ribs, you would have just gone right through.
Right.
So, there are a bunch of learning things for me, is like, one lung hit deer, obviously that's a deer that can live. I think what did this guy in was obviously the small cut in the heart and that broken leg. But I think the thing that really helped me is the thing that actually in the moment hurt the most, but that was bumping that deer. I think if he would have laid another, 6 hours, it would have climbed up a little bit more.
Mm-hmm.
And not to say he wouldn't have died, it just would have been really hard to find him, because when he
Yeah.
jumped up out of that bed, when I went and looked at it, there were several huge clots of blood in the bed, and him walking through bean stubble. I mean, we were able to find blood in bean stubble, and anyone that's ever tracked a deer through like a lawn or like bean stubble or like short grass, you know how hard it is to find blood in that.
Mm-hmm.
So the fact that we were able to find blood in bean stubble definitely tells me that, like, getting him kicked up and getting those clots out kept that blood going, and I think expedited the process, even though it was obviously much longer than I ever would have wanted.
Right. That's crazy, man. I'm glad you got that buck. And those two guys are gems for hooking that up. You know what I mean? Because that just doesn't happen very often anymore. Like, I know a guy.
It doesn't.
There's a guy that I know who was in. He was also in Kansas the past like week or so, and I think he hit one and like ran onto. He was on public and hit one and ran on the private, and he was like, I don't know whether, like, I don't know. I heard this like secondhand from a buddy of mine, because it's a mutual friend that we have. And I don't know if the hit was, I'm assuming it was fatal, but he asked the property owner if he could go on and retrieve his deer, and the guy was like, no. He's like, kick bricks, and I'm just like, man, I get it. It's like, it's your property, but it's just, I have a hard time believing, like, man, if someone killed a deer and it was on my property, it's like, I'd be like, dude, go get your deer. Like, you didn't kill it on my property. It just happened to go die on my property. You know what I mean? Like,
exactly.
So that's awesome that they did that, man. It's awesome buck. And, that's awesome. I wanted to ask you, like, how often do you rattle in Wisconsin? Like, or call?
That was going to be the last day I ever brought. I do it a fair amount in late October, because I do kind of have, like, my strategy is very much like, when I'm not hunting a specific deer, I'll hunt areas that I know are good and have high densities of like 3-year-old plus deer. Mm-hmm. And what I'm always doing, at least the way that I play it in my head, is I focus on these top 10% spots, and I'll bring the others in, and I'll just try to, like, call something in those mm-hmm. areas where I know there's a lot of deer. killed one other buck on public rattling in Wisconsin, but other than that, this was the only other time I've ever had one respond positively to it.
Right.
So, it was a situation where I'm like, man, these things are heavy, they're loud, I'm like bringing them, it's extra space. This was going to be the last time. And then that happened.
Right. And what kind of decoy do you use? I'm just curious.
So what I did, I didn't have one on that front, but I bought a Montana decoy, the freshman buck.
Okay. Yeah.
I think that's what it's called. It's a little like 4-pointer. It's a 2-dimensional decoy. Folds up. I can put it right in my backpack. And it's one of those. It's so light that you don't even know it's there. And how I'm going to start using that thing is even in the timber. Just putting that thing out, especially on days where some of these open ridge tops here you can see you have pretty good visibility on, and if you're not right on the X, I do think that that's a helpful tool to get something to at least come in, posture up, and hopefully do the things.
Right. Yeah. It's like I started using a decoy. Well, I don't really use one around here, and there's one setup that I probably should, but definitely use it out. Where I was at this past couple weeks, I just use a heads up decoy that I kind of rigged up, put on a stake. Yeah. That way I can stick it into the ground, and and it's been really helpful. I decoyed in like a small, I don't know, he's probably like a 1.5 8-point or 2-year-old 8-point while I was out there. He came into like, goodness, man, I think he got to like 5 yards. I was just like staring at it, and I was just in a ghillie jacket, like moving it, and I'm moving, like seeing, because I wanted to see how much I could get away with. I was like, well, let me test it on this guy and see like how much movement I can get away with before he gets unnerved. Because my buddy Travis Glassman, he's like, dude, he's like, this time of year, he's like, if you have that decoy out, he's like, you will be surprised by how much movement you can get away with as long as you are majority of your body is behind the decoy. He's like, because they're just expecting to see movement from the deer. They're like, and they just get so zoned in on the decoys, like they don't even really notice what's moving around the decoy. They just associate it with the deer. And so I got him to like 5-7 yards and was moving and turning it like as he was kind of walking around it, and he finally got jiggy and like moved away, but he only took like one jump to like 12 yards or whatever, and just like stood there. I mean, I had him in bow range for probably 5 minutes.
That is super cool.
Yeah, it's just cool. It's like he was so close I could hear him breathing, like really like snorting in. You know what I mean? Getting a lot of scent, because he was actually sniffing an area that I had walked through, and he was like, you could really tell he was investigating. He's like, "What's that?" It's like, and then he didn't even see the decoy at first because I put it up because I saw him coming from like, oh geez, I don't know, probably 60 yards away, and I just put the decoy up, and I was like, we'll play with this guy and see if like how this works, and just like get a practice run in. And he got to like 10 yards and still didn't notice it, and he just happened to look up. And he was like, whoa. He was like, hey. He was like, who are you? And he starts walking around it, and I'm like moving. I was like, this guy has no clue that I'm here. It's crazy.
That is so cool.
But man, I want to get back to like something we talked about earlier, because you kind of walked us through both your hunts, and we talked about how you got into the hunting space, how you got into the hunting industry, and and what that path looked like. And then you kind of told us about these 2 hunts that you recently had, and it's clear that you have like a passion for the outdoors and hunting whitetails, like specifically, right? And you and I talked about this a little bit before we started recording. For anyone who's listened to this and listened to the session that Jared Scheffler and I did from Whitetail Adrenaline, like one thing we talked about was just like some of the challenges that he had, like, in building, in doing, putting together Uncuffed, right? And he had some kind of challenges that he went through with that. And then he really kind of lost his love for what he was doing. And that was part of it, because he just burned himself out, right? And that, he went so hard for so long at that thing that he just couldn't do it anymore. And I have some experience in this just like from music, because I did the same thing. It's like I ran so hard so long in the music space that I got to a point to where like the thing that I loved and was passionate about, like I grew to hate, and I had to just like completely leave it. And so for a guy who works in the hunting space, is like around hunting all the time, like how do you find that balance, that you're able to balance like the professional world that you live in, that you do this for a living, right? While maintaining like the passion for the hunt like you do, right? Because I think it's a fine balancing act that you have to kind of thread the needle a little bit, because I think you can really easily let the amount of time you spend as a profession kind of seep into, and even if, I mean, you love your job, you know, and that's awesome, but there is a professional component of it that like, that is work. Let's be honest, right? It's like you do it day in and day out. And if you do anything day in and day out without any like little breaks, you know, it can become monotonous. And so I'm just curious how like you've kept that passion for the outdoors that you have while also doing it professionally and not letting like sometimes the work grind kind of seep away or eat away at the passion part of it, if you know what I mean.
I know exactly what you mean there. And I think, so I'm going to give some context to this because it's not a total black and white answer. The last year that I was at Midwest Whitetail was 2017. The last fall that I was there was the fall of 2016. And between spring turkey and bow hunting that fall, I think I hunted, and this isn't times with a bow. I think in that fall, I only had a bow in my hand 5 times. So 5 times with a bow in my hand, and I was in the field. I want to say it was between 87 and 92 days. Now that's from turkey season and bow season, so that's not just deer hunting, but that's a lot of time. And of that, 5 of those days were my personal hunts with a bow that fall. And so it was a lot. And I remember times, specifically late November of that year, it was the one that stands out to me the most. It was the weekend after Thanksgiving. There was snow on the ground. I had to film Bill that day. And the next day, Bill wasn't going to hunt. So, like, I had all the opportunity. I had a tag. I could have hunted. And I'm like, man, I'm sleeping in. The last thing I want to do tomorrow is go on. I need to, you know, hang out with my wife. I want to walk our dog, and watch a football game like a person, you
normal
know,
human. Yeah,
exactly. And that was a moment. That was actually the moment that I started looking for jobs outside of filming hunts. That was like the time, and it was December that I found a job at the Department of Natural Resources here in Wisconsin that I did for 1 year between Midwest Whitetail and then coming over to Vortex. And when I did that, made that decision to leave Midwest Whitetail, it was a super hard decision because we had talked about hunting public back in those days. We didn't have a name for it. We didn't call it the hunting public, but we would have powwows about that all the time. Like, it's something that we can do. We wanted to do it at Midwest Whitetail, but obviously the way things worked out, they ended up doing their own thing, and it's, you know, everyone that's familiar with the hunting public knows how it worked out. So walking away from that was something that was super hard, not only because I was passionate about what we were doing, but because I love those guys. Right. So left that, and my wife and I made that decision, and it was, to this day, I'll stand by that was absolutely the right call. And then that following fall would have been the fall of 2017. I remember thinking to myself, like, this is going to be really interesting for me. Like, this is going to be it'll be like my first time hunting again a little bit. And I'm going to just kind of go into this and see what I like, what I don't like, and I'm going to hunt as much as I want. And, you know, I grew up in Wisconsin, and I used to have some private access here. And I had never hunted public land in Wisconsin, in the southern part of the state, because I grew up hunting, you know, private land in the southeast part. But I lost that. So that year, fall 17, was entirely dedicated just to kind of learning public land and figuring it out in this area. And I was really fortunate, killed an awesome buck on November 4th. It was something that was total, like, troubleshooting the whole season and figuring it out. It was a blank slate, and I did it at my pace, which I think is key. Like, I did it how I wanted to do it. If I had a day off of work that I could go on, I either did, or I maybe went to the apple pumpkin patch with my wife and did that.
Right.
And it sounds so funny, you know, kind of like talking through that, but man, that balance is something that I was just personally, like, I was missing that balance. And then the other thing that I thought back on a lot was the fall of 2016. Again, that last fall when I deer hunted that I worked full time at Midwest Whitetail, I hunted northern Wisconsin, and this is something that, like, I'm super not proud of. Killed a little 4-pointer up there in northern Wisconsin on like this 500,000 acre piece of public land, and I killed that buck. And I didn't even take a picture of me holding it because I was just, it was like, oh, it's a small deer, you know? And I'm like, man, like looking back at that now, I regret that so much because shooting that buck up there, that little, probably 9-inch 4-pointer is the equivalent to shooting a 140-inch deer on public land in Iowa, you know?
Right.
And I was just so close to the industry at that point. And the industry was telling everyone to shoot big deer. And that was the things that were getting talked about. That I didn't even take a grip and grin photo with a buck that, like, man, I could hunt my whole life and I might shoot a handful more of those, you know?
Right.
So that was like a red alarm for me that, like, man, like something is wrong internally that I need to kind of figure out what that looks like. So to wrap a bow on that, like very long-winded, but I feel like that context is important. What I do now, and I've never been more satisfied and excited about hunting than I am right now today. And
awesome.
What basically my thing is that balance between of like, if I want to do something with my wife and our dog, my friends or family or whatever, do that, but hunt for the right reasons and what makes you happy, you know, like,
right.
My success metric isn't going to be a age class or inch development. It's like, if it feels right, and my wife always asks me, she's like, well, are you ready to be done? You know, are you ready to part ways with your tech?
Right. It's a great way to look at it.
Something, yeah. And that has been the thing that I just kind of hang on to. And, you know, it's a very easy answer to that question. When something comes in, it's like, you know, yep, I feel fulfilled out of this experience. I'm going to shoot this deer. Or maybe, hey, you know, this is an awesome buck. I'd be very happy with it, but I'm not ready to be done yet.
It's a great way to look at it.
Yeah. Yep. So that's been that trick.
Yeah. That's awesome, man. Dude, well, I've kept you here a little over an hour and a half, buddy. I want to be sensitive to your time. I'm glad we finally got to get on here and chat. You have an open invitation anytime you want to come on, dude. You know, you're salt of the earth people, man. You're good people. You tell good stories, which is a bonus. You know, and you hunt for the right reasons. And I always love talking to guys that, you know, are honest about their feelings about it and how they've gone through it, because I think not enough people kind of share that, you know, you don't have to love it all the time and it's okay. You know, it's okay for it to sometimes take a back seat to other things, you know, that's perfectly fine. Oftentimes when you do, you come back and you're actually a lot better. You know, there's like,
Absolutely.
It's kind of like the quarterback that's having a rough run, right? Gets injured, and maybe getting that injury and sitting and watching the game for 4 weeks is the best thing that ever happened to him, because he remembers how much he likes it and embraces like the process, not just the game day, right? Because he can't do any of it.
Yep.
And then also sees the field from a different perspective, right? And I think sometimes in hunting, giving yourself a little grace, you know, it can help you out in the long run. Funny thing happens is, I'll quote my buddy Tony Peterson. He told me this, and you know, I talked about this before we started recording, is that when you just start deer hunting, he's like, you'll be surprised how quickly tags get filled and big deer start hitting the ground. You know,
absolutely, man.
So, well, I appreciate you, man. Before I get you out of here, let people know where they can follow you, find out what's going on with you, and anything that Vortex might have going on that you want to mention too. Yeah,
definitely follow along Vortex. We've got we're doing a lot of cool stuff over there. You know, we're really building up what we're calling our Vortex Nation newsletter, which is basically a newsletter that you sign up for on the website. We'll send you all our like latest content, exclusive content, you know, promos, all that stuff. Personally, you can follow me on Instagram, Erik Barber. I post a lot of my hunting stuff there. Do some freelance work for Outdoor Life, more gear review type stuff. So you can kind of get thoughts on that kind of thing. And that's where you can find me.
Awesome, brother. I appreciate you coming on, buddy.
Thanks, man. Been a blast.
All right, folks, that is a wrap for today's show. I'd like to thank all of you for listening, and if you haven't yet, please head over to iTunes and leave us a 5-star rating, and be sure to subscribe to the podcast. And while you're at it, head over to YouTube and give us a sub there as well. I'd be super appreciative if you would do those couple things for me. And before I shut this thing down, we need to give a big shout out to our partners who continue to help us make this podcast possible: Tethered, Exodus Outdoor Gear, and Genesee Beer. And until next time, we'll see y'all.
Bye.